Welcome to the first episode of Stranger Than Fiction. Stranger Than Fiction episodes are all about stories that are true, but sound far too fetched or unrealistic to be true. But I assure you they are true. In this show we're doing 3 stories. So let's crack on. If at any point you've heard of a story or you don't want to hear it, if you look down at the timeline thing, there is different chapters for each story, so feel free to skip to the next story. As I tell the stories, they will get more and more unbelievable, with the most unbelievable at the end. Without further ado, let's get on with it. Well, I almost forgot to do the disclaimers. This is a video full of true stories, so if you're sharing or you're commenting, and I do want you to share it and I do want you to comment on it, but please do be very careful that these are true stories, so be a bit sensitive with anything you say about them, especially in the public domain. Thanks. Christine Collins was born in 1988 as Christine Ida Dunn. She married Walter J. Collins, and he was an ex-con, but he'd always hid his history away from Christine, so she didn't know about any of that. And in September 1918, they had a son who they called Walter. Yeah, they were both called Walter, but you don't need to know the dad's name because he doesn't really appear in this. Anyway, onwards. On the 10th of March 1926, the son was 10-year-old, and Christine had given him some money to go to the cinema, and he went missing. Now, his disappearance got nationwide attention. The LA Police Department were following leads, although they had hundreds of leads to follow, and they followed pretty much all of them, but they didn't have any success at all. The police received masses of negative publicity about this. They were under a lot of pressure, especially from the public. Everyone wanted this case solving. 5 months after Walter's disappearance, a boy in DeKalb, Illinois, 2,000 miles away from LA, came forward and said, "Yeah, I'm Walter." Christine then exchanged letters and photographs with a boy, and at which point he was brought to LA to meet Christine. At the reunion, this boy turns up, Christine turns up, obviously the boy's with the police, and Christine goes, "That's not my son." And the police are like, "Yeah, of course, he says he is." Christine's like, "I don't know who he is, but he's 100% not my son." The officer in charge of the case was Captain J.J. Jones. He was under massive amounts of pressure from the press, from the public, from his bosses. He needed to get this case solved. So in his desperation to get it solved, he said to Christine, "Look, we're certain it is. He says he is. Take him home and try him out." Like, what? So basically what he's saying to us is, look, you need to take him home. Spend a couple of weeks with him. It's been 6 months, 5 months. You know, he'll have changed a bit. Just take this boy that you're saying is not your son home and see how it goes. And after a bit of toing and froing, Christine eventually goes, alright, she takes him home, and 3 weeks later she comes back and she says, "I'm telling you, this is not Walter. And if it is a Walter, it's not my Walter, this is not my son." Now at this point she's got the dental records, she's got friends, all saying, this little boy is not Walter. Despite that, Jones, the officer in charge, says, "Look, you're a bad mom, and you're bringing ridicule to the police. Something has to be done." So Jones decides, with all this pressure on his head, the way I can solve this is I'm going to commit Christine to the LA County Hospital under the psychiatric ward under the Code 12. Now, Code 12 is basically something that they use to commit or jail somebody that's been difficult or an inconvenience. And obviously this is very much inconvenience to Jones. He's got all this pressure, he's produced a boy that's Walter, and he says it's not him. So with Christine now in the psychiatric ward, Jones goes back to the boy and questions him. And he says, "Alright, fair enough, I'm not Walter, I am Arthur Hutchins Jr., a 12-year-old runaway from Iowa where I was found." And what had happened is the police had turned up and said, "Excuse me, are you Walter Collins from LA?" And at first he said no, and then he realised Hollywood's in LA, and I really want to go to Hollywood to meet Tom Mix, my favourite actor. So he said yeah, knowing that the police had then taken him to LA and improve his chances of meeting Tom Mix. 10 days after Arthur had announced that he's not actually Walter, Christine was released. I don't know why it took 10 days, but it did. Christine then did file a lawsuit against the LA Police Department and Jones, and because of all the trouble that had caused her, because she'd had a lot of hard time in the press and stuff, and obviously she spent weeks in this psychiatric ward. So the judge said Jones has to pay $10,800 to Christine, which in today's money equates to about $180,000, but Jones never paid. Now this story didn't actually end here, but I don't want it to go on for too long. It does get pulled into the Wineville chicken coop murder stories and stuff, where somebody says that they killed her, and it goes on. And I might do a video on that separately, but if you do want to look that story up, it is quite interesting. But for now, we're going to move on to story number 2. In July 2021, a 25-year-old Colombian lawyer named Yesenia Gomez decided she wanted to go bungee jumping. She told her boyfriend, and her boyfriend were really excited and really happy because he'd wanted to do it for a while too, but he didn't want to do it without her, and she said she wanted to do it a few times, but every time he got close to booking it, she bailed out, she cancelled, she got too scared. I'm not doing it. So when he realised she was being serious, he got straight onto the bungee jumping company and booked it in. Amagar is a popular tourist town in Colombia. It was only an hour's drive away from them, and this town is surrounded by really dense, thick jungle. And if you follow the path through and keep going, you'll get to this really old, really long train bridge. Now this train bridge is a 160-foot drop, and it drops over this massive ravine. It must be a really nice view over there, but this is where they're going to be jumping from. So a week or two later, on the 18th of July 2021, Yesenia and her boyfriend arrived at Amagar after an hour's drive and start walking up this path. And it's quite a long walk as well. Obviously it's a nice, pleasurable walk, but it is a walk. And Yesenia that's quite scared, she's excited. You know the mixed feelings you get from doing something like bungee jumping or the thought of doing something like that. So she's got all these pent up emotions, she's excited, she's a bit nervous, she's a bit scared, but she's raring to go. Now this bridge is a massively popular bungee jumping spot, and when they arrived, they didn't quite expect the queue they saw. I think they already knew there were 90 people to jump that day, but I suppose they didn't expect to have to wait in a massive queue. So if we get onto the bridge, there's this massive queue in front of them, there's about 50 to 90 people in front of them. They've got a long wait, well over an hour. And all this time they're waiting, they stood on the edge of this massive bridge, looking down this 160-foot drop into the ravine. And they're watching other people jump off, and obviously with this 1 hour's drive you're getting a bit of butterflies, and then they're walking, you're getting closer, you can hear the screams and stuff, you're getting more and more butterflies, you're getting excited, you're getting a bit scared, chest might start feeling a bit tight, and now having to wait for over an hour side of this huge drop watching people jump off. And it's quite daunting to Yesenia, and she's like, what am I going to do? All of a sudden, when you stood at the top of this big drop, it doesn't look as exciting, it doesn't look as fun, it looks really scary. Now, hats off to anyone that's done bungee jumping. I am, and I'm not a big fan of roller coasters, so I can't imagine I'd enjoy it. Yesenia's nerves and excitement and fear start to become a bit overwhelming. She's feeling her chest getting tighter, she's starting to panic. So I really don't want to do this. So her boyfriend tries to calm her down, the usual. It's okay, you're going to be so proud of yourself after you've done it. Of course you want to do it. You can get to edge. It's a bit last minute nerves. You get to edge. You're going to jump off. You're so proud of yourself. Look at everyone else doing it. It's so much fun. You know that usual stuff that people sell you when you don't want to do something, and everyone, it's going to be great. We'll have a right good time. Now this didn't fully work. It did a bit. It calmed her down, but she's still a bit nervous. She's still a bit panicky, and she's saying to herself, I can do this. I've got this. We're going to do it. It's going to be all right. Everyone else is safe. I'm going to be fine. It's going to be good. So after hours of waiting in line and getting more and more nervous, getting more and more scared, calming down, getting nervous again, they finally reach the front of the queue. It's now their turn to jump. The staff tell them to come forward and get harnesses on, so they step forward, looking over the edge, looking at how daunting and scary it is. So just imagine how much in turmoil Yesenia was. She's already really, really scared. And now she's at the final push. She's looking down, and wow, that just must be... If you're not already nervous, you're going to be nervous at that point. That's going to be like the climax of the most nervous part. At this point, she's like blanks out. She's focused. I'm not scared, I can do this. I'm not scared, I can do this. And she's really focused on what she's doing. I'm not going to back out, I'm not going to back out, I can do this. Now, finally, one of the staff members say jump. So Yesenia jumps off the edge. But that would be a major mistake. You see, in Yesenia's panicked mind, she weren't really paying attention to what was going on around her. She knew she'd got her harness on, and she was just looking down, and she was thinking about how everything's going to be alright, and how scared she is, and she got this tunnel vision. So, when the staff said jump, Yesenia jumped, and her legs weren't attached. Yesenia didn't realise at that moment the staff wasn't talking to her, they were talking to her boyfriend. Meaning there were absolutely nothing to yank her back just before she hit the ground. As soon as she jumped off, Yasina's boyfriend, in complete shock and horror, realising what had just happened, he ran to the end of the bridge, he ran down the slope, jumped over the railings, fought through the bushes and stuff, and he got to Yasina, and Yasina was already dead. However, it wasn't the impact that had killed Yasina. You see, she was that scared and that panicked at that moment that after she jumped off, she must have thought, my God, I'm not attached. So the panic just went through the roof and she had an heart attack and died before hitting the floor. Now, our third story is definitely the most far-fetched, most unrealistic thing I have ever heard in my life, hence why it's in third position. You might have already heard it, it's the story of Aaron Ralston. He was born on the 27th of October 1975 in Marion, Iowa. His family moved to Denver when he was 12, he attended Cherry Creek High School, and he also learned to ski and bagpipe. Later, he got a college degree in mechanical engineering, French, and a minor in piano. At Carnegie Mellon, he served as a resident assistant, he studied abroad, he was an active intramural sports participant. During the summer, he worked as a rafting guide. Then after graduation, Ralston worked as a mechanical engineer. During his time as an engineer, he built up skills in mountaineering, and in 2012, he moved to Colorado, where he could follow his passion and purpose in life, which was mountaineering. In 2003, he was caught in a grade 5 avalanche with his ski partners. Although no one was seriously hurt in the incident, his friends did stop speaking to him in the aftermath, and that majorly caused him to reevaluate his approach to risk management. So on with the story. On the 26th of April 2003, Aaron woke up in the Canyonlands National Park in Utah. It was a gorgeous day, he'd got up nice and early, ready to start adventuring. He cycled 15 miles to the Blue John Canyon, and Blue John Canyon is a slot canyon, which basically means it's a long, narrow channel. It's generally drainage ways, and it's just got sheer rock walls. Specifically, Blue John is 11 miles long, and in places it's only like 3 feet wide. It's a very narrow canyonway. So he arrives, he ties his bike up or whatever, and he sets off. 6 hours later, down into this slot canyon, the walls are starting to get really narrow and tight. So he decides, in order to carry on, he needs to push off either side of the walls. I don't know if you've ever seen people do it on doorways or whatever, but it's basically got an hand on each side, a foot on each side, and he's using that to like push through. Now, while he was descending the lower stretches of the canyon, an 800-pound huge boulder gets dislodged, and it comes tumbling down on top of him. As he quickly shifts out of the way, it smashes his left hand, and then it completely shatters his right hand, but it stays on top of his right hand. So he's managed to get his left hand free, but now there's this 800-pound boulder completely pinning his hand down. So now he's about 100 feet off the floor. If he looks directly down through the slot, he can see the floor. His hand's pinned, and he's about 20 miles away from the nearest road. And if that weren't bad enough, absolutely nobody knows he's there. Because he does this quite often, he didn't tell anyone he was going, or at least he didn't tell anyone exactly where he was going, so there was no chance anyone was going to come looking for him anytime soon. And then he's in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles to the nearest road, so there's no chance of anyone walking past or hearing him shouting. And to make things even worse than that, he hadn't even got his phone, so even if he did get a signal, he still wouldn't be able to call out because he hadn't got it. He is completely alone with zero chance of contacting anybody. So obviously the first thing he did, as anyone would, his hand's trapped under this massive boulder, he tries to tug it out, tries to get it free, but it just won't work. This 800-pound boulder has it pinned. There is no way he's getting his hand back. Now at this point, if his luck's not bad enough, he realises he didn't plan for being out for days. He didn't bring much with him. In regards to water, he's got 350ml, not even a pint of water, and he's also only got 2 burritos for food. Now at this point you might be thinking, because I said there's a 100 feet drop, that he's dangling with his hand trapped. But remember I said he was shimmying, so at this point he's practically got his back against one wall, his feet up against the other wall, holding himself up. And it actually sounds pretty comfy, like a little chill out spot or something. He's even got his table. Obviously he's not that comfy, he's got his hand trapped under a massive boulder, but you know what I'm saying. Assuming he died without intervention and realising no one's going to find him anytime soon, he spends 5 days slowly sipping this little bit of water he's got. 5 days for 350ml of water. That's like not even a mouthful a day type thing. and slowly eating the crumbs of his burritos. The only other thing he had with him was a multi-tool. Now, it said that this was an expensive multi-tool. It was the kind of multi-tool you'd get free with some other tool. So for the first 3 days, he spent these days with his multi-tool. He got the knife out and he's jabbing at the boulder, trying to break a bit off, trying to tunnel his arm out, if you like. He's trying to lift the rock somehow. But there's obviously no use. This is an 800-pound boulder. He's got no way of getting this out anytime soon. So at this point in, 3 days in, with very little food and water, he's dehydrated and he's getting delirious. It was clear nobody was going to save him, and he had a choice to make. He could stay there and die of starvation, or he could amputate his arm. Not quite ready to give in, Ralston decided he was going to try and amputate his arm. Having experimented with tourniquets to cut off the blood circulation and making some experimental superficial cuts, he realised on the 4th day that in order to amputate his arm, he'd have to cut through the bone. And this cheap, potentially free multi-tool just weren't going to do the job. So, practically giving in again, on the 5th day he ran out of water and the food, and he had to resort to drinking his own urine. Having it in, he grabbed his multi-tool and he etched his name, his date of birth and his presumed date of death into the canyon wall. He then got the last thing out of his backpack, which was a camcorder. He didn't have much battery left, so he used that bit of battery to send a message back to his loved ones, basically saying he's sorry and whatever else.
My name's Ralston. My parents are Donna and Larry Ralston of Englewood, Colorado. Whoever finds this, please make an attempt to get it to them. Be sure of it, I would appreciate it.
He didn't expect to survive the night, but as the night went on, he kept trying to stay warm, and he began hallucinating. Part of his hallucinations, or maybe it were a dream, either which way, he had an epiphany. And in this epiphany, he only had half an arm, and he was playing with a child. So, fully believing that this epiphany were a sign, he's now fully motivated to stay alive. He wants to survive, he knows that he's supposed to survive. Having already determined that he couldn't cut through his arm, through the bone at least, he did what his epiphany showed him to do. So, he's got his arm trapped under this boulder and he's moving around trying to find the torque, and then he takes a deep breath and snaps his arm off. He then spent 1 hour painstakingly amputating his forearm with this cheap multi-tool that had a dull 2-inch knife and some pliers. Having freed himself, Ralston climbed down this slot canyon wall. He rappelled down a 65-foot sheer wall and then hiked out of the canyon, all with just one hand. After 6 miles of running/hiking, he encounters this family that's on holiday from the Netherlands. This family obviously gives him some food and some water, and more importantly, they call the emergency services. He ended up being picked up in a wider part of the canyon area by a helicopter, approximately 4 hours after he amputated his arm. Now, his family had noticed he was missing, and they had contacted the authorities, and the rescuers didn't know where he were, but they had narrowed it down to the huge area that is the Canyonlands. Through this entire ordeal, Ralston had lost 40 pounds in weight and 25% of his blood volume. Because when he amputated his arm, it had died or decomposed that much, if he'd have amputated it any earlier, he would have died from blood loss within them 4 hours. However, if he'd have not amputated it, he would have died within 1 or 2 days after that point. His hand that he left under the boulder was later recovered by the authorities. It took 13 men, a winch and a hydraulic jack just to move the boulder. It was also said that if he had been found in time and he was still alive, in order to move the boulder, it would have killed him. So to keep him alive and get his arm free, they would have had to amputate his arm either which way. Having recovered his arm, it was cremated and the ashes were given back to him. He then went back to the scene where he'd been trapped 6 months later on his 28th birthday with a camera crew for NBC's Dateline, and that's where he spread the ashes. He said it's where they belong. That's all for today's show, guys. If you enjoyed this show, if you got anything from it, please do share it, please do subscribe, put the thumbs up, it all does help masses. If you've got anything you want me to cover, please put it down in the comments below. And until next time, guys, thanks for watching.